Okay, story time, scribes. Recently, I was really struggling and getting a lot of writer's block for a project that I've been working on since the beginning of my feature film certificate program. So I did the inevitable. I rewrote from the very beginning because I realized that the beginning is where all of the problems started for me. But one weird thing that stuck out to me when I started to rewrite the first 15 pages of this script from scratch, I was whitewashing my characters. Welcome back to my channel, scribes. My name is Pika Lee. I'm a writer and filmmaker. I make videos that hopefully help demystify the entertainment business and the business of screenwriting. Some tips and tricks for building the perfect writer's foundation. Screenwriters, I hope you're ready, because this video is all about whitewashing. If you're not familiar with what whitewashing is, basically it's a term used to describe media who places in white actors or white persons to play a person of color, minorities, or just in general having a script or a story or something in media that basically just only touches on the sort of white perspective. And if you're like me, someone who has grown up in the US all of your life, but heritage-wise has a family who is from a totally different country, you might identify with feeling slightly removed from your culture. For me, I've grown up in the United States. My family is from Puerto Rico. And although Puerto Rico has been a part of the United States for so many decades, I think since probably the late 1800s, I have grown up with tons of traditions that are absolutely from the island itself, loving it from sort of an outside perspective. Now hold up, this is not saying that my family did not teach me how to be a good islander. This is basically me saying that I have felt as if I haven't contributed very much to my own culture and my own heritage, and wanting to write more about it because that is what I grew up experiencing. Now, that is important to me. That has been something that's really started to impact my writing voice. From a very young age, I've realized that whenever I write a character, I tend to make them automatically and envision them automatically as someone who's the ideal white person. Writers don't talk about a lot when you're talking about feeling slightly removed from your own heritage and your own culture, and the 4 things that I can do for my writing in the future to make it more inclusive. So if you find yourself writing characters who are consistently pretty much just a generic space of a character, not a lot of specifics, nothing culturally going on, and you want that in your story, let's have a talk. I can't fully blame Hollywood. Screenwriters have a part too. It's time for us to start thinking of the diversity at the script level before anything has begun. The first thing that I realized was I needed to get on Netflix ASAP. Now I know that sounds really strange to say, but what I mean by jump on Netflix is I needed to watch more foreign films. I already love foreign films, don't get me wrong. Foreign films are some of my favorite things to pass the time with, and just getting a taste and a feel for what kind of genres internationally are sort of the top genres. If you haven't watched my video about the top genres internationally that translate like beautifully, if you want to watch that video, you can definitely subscribe down below so you can just go check it out after this video. Is that coming on too strong? I'm trying to get you to subscribe because the button's just right down there. Watching foreign films actually brings out a little bit more of the culture in me. It reminds me of those small little traditions, sort of like when that movie blew up, A Greek Wedding. That wasn't what it was called. My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Centering around pretty much an Americanized Greek woman who is finding love at last and all of the crazy cultural traditions that happen with her family. It was a really interesting, very fun movie for me to watch when I was much younger with my mom because I could absolutely identify with that. And that's something that I really want to bring into my films. I want it to be relatable. I want people like me who maybe just don't speak that much Spanish to see someone who doesn't speak that much Spanish struggling in her own family to understand them sometimes or to identify with them, because that's just the fun of growing up in a family like that, right? And whether or not I know my own language or not, growing up in a family like that I absolutely love the foods that I eat, the traditions that we have, the parties we go to, the music we listen to and dance to. It's incredible, and I want to put that into my scripts. So watching foreign films for me is a really fun way of seeing how that is incorporated in other cultures and how I can pick that out pretty clearly in a storyline. It gives me more ideas into incorporating them in my own stories, and it also makes me appreciate other cultures so that I'm including more diversity in my own scripts. I also don't want to just focus on my culture. I love other cultures. I love traveling. I love experiencing that, and that's why I watch foreign films. I'd love to bring that into my own films because I have many different friends from different cultures. It would be insane of me to continue on and not realizing how much of old Hollywood has been influencing the way that I write my characters. There are so many themes and things about putting cultural relevance in your characters and in the detailing of your story that will resonate internationally, whether or not they speak the language. You know it's a problem when you start adding cultural details into your script and it feels unnatural, but still exciting. The second thing that I realized was that when I go back to reread my scripts, I need to be more conscious of who my characters are. I can understand now why it's so important to do fine arc outlines and make sure I know so many details about my characters, because I'd like to actually have characters who have dimension, and mostly because of the specificity of their world and their backstory and their culture, their heritage. Look at those details and ask, how can I layer more into my story to make it feel a little bit more organic, realistic, relatable? Try to be a little bit more intentional with what you're putting in your script and why. Only do this if having a specific cultural specificity and detailing makes sense to your story.
Why do you want to know?
Well, it just sounded a little deep for... It just sounded a little deep for a Friday night. I was just curious.
Religion is a very important part of our culture, at least in my family. And I believe that your destiny has already been decided. You just have to read the signs.
Mm-hmm.
You don't believe that?
No.
You may not have to be specific about the region that your character comes from or the culture they come from if it doesn't have anything to do with the actual story itself. You could probably just make sure to announce that this person is of a different culture in the actual character description in your action, and this may help with casting. A lot of times, casting may just try to diversify on their own. Shonda Rhimes talks about how she intentionally didn't put down exactly who should play which part because she wanted to have a diverse casting happen. I'm sure as time went on, these characters got solidified into the show. There may have been some cultural references happening, and that probably gave much more dimension to the television show Grey's Anatomy. But if you do have a show that is more along the lines of something like The Night Of, where you have some cultural references and that is sort of going to stigmatize the character and that works for the plot overall, that's great. That's exactly what you want to make sure that you are actually actively being conscious of those details that go into framing that story.
Thanks to Barbie, all problems of feminism and equal rights have been solved. At least, that's what the Barbies think. After all, they're living in Barbie land. Who am I to burst their bubble?
The third thing that I want you to be conscious of is stereotyping in your own culture. Yeah, that could actually happen. Stereotyping in your own culture is very prevalent if you're not super familiar with the practices of the culture itself. And that can happen even though you are in it your own self. I'm sure I have stereotyped my own characters from time to time and then fixed it. It can absolutely happen where socially you've got stereotypes that happen even within your own culture. I want to be as accurate as I can and faithful to the character. It is vicious when someone points it out who is actually deep ingrained in the culture and feels Like, this is not doing any justice to the character. It's a phenomena of society, where you live, and how it's portrayed to you, how it's spoken about in the news and in politics and in your community. So just make sure that when you're going through this, you either have someone to take a look at it who might be part of the culture, who can tell you, you know, I identify with this is great, or who can tell you, like, look, this doesn't feel so realistic. It's okay if you want to experiment writing a different culture completely. Just take these steps, these preventative steps. Now, the fourth thing that I realized was that write what you know just gave me a whole new perspective of my voice. I really do like writing crime drama sometimes. I also like writing horror, and I like writing sci-fi sometimes, fantasy. There's so much that I like to write, and I figured, how do you write those with what you know if you've never lived those lives? I just wish that people would have explained write what you know as thematically write what you know. A lot of what I write thematically has to do with sort of identity and growth of a person and relationships. I hope that just talking about these things with you really opens up your eyes to some of the things that you might be struggling with yourself, and maybe have some really great tips in there of how you can sort of remedy that just a little bit. Thank you so much for sticking with me on this video. If you are a subscriber, thank you so much for subscribing. I am so glad to see you back here again. And if you are not yet subscribed, just, you know, it's just a button right down there. I will see you, creative beings and scribes, on the next one.